On December 11, 1936, Edward VIII, King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and Emperor of India, abdicated the throne for a woman he loved, an American, Wallis Warfield Simpson, who was then married to her second husband, Ernest Aldrich Simpson, a London shipping broker. However, the process was a long, stressful one that nearly sparked a constitutional crisis in Britain and, of course, changed the course of the British monarchy. So, why would the king of the British Empire, one of the greatest empires in modern history, abandon his crown and throne for a woman? This is the full story. Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David was born on June 23, 1894 at White Lodge, Richmond Park, on the outskirts of London during the reign of his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. He was the eldest son of King George V and Queen Mary. At the time of his birth, he was third in line of succession to the throne behind his grandfather Edward VII and father George V. Although he was educated at the Naval Preparatory College of Osborne, the Royal Naval College Dartmouth, and Magdalen College, University of Oxford, Edward wasn't considered much of an intellectual. No, at 5'7" did he cut a powerful figure, but he was said to be quick-witted and free-spirited. On May 6, 1910, when his father ascended the throne as George V on the death of his grandfather Edward VII, he automatically became the Duke of Cornwall and Duke of Rothesay. He was created Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester a month later on June 23, 1910, on what would be his 16th birthday. So, how did the prince with a blue blood entangle himself romantically with a commoner? Not just a commoner, an American. Not just an American, a divorcee who would divorce twice. How was Wallis able to make a king of England not just to give up his throne, but the entire British Empire and its dominion, which included Nigeria? Born Bessie Wallis Warfield on June 19, 1896, at the border of Maryland and Pennsylvania, Warfield was an American socialite named after her father, Tiku Wallis Warfield, and her mother's elder sister, Bessie. Her father, who was the son of a successful flour merchant, died of tuberculosis on November 15, 1896, just a few months after Wallis's birth. However, her late father's wealthy brother, Solomon Davis Warfield, catered for her welfare and education, where she attended the most expensive girls' school in Maryland. Wallis's fine violet blue eyes and petite figure ensured that she had many admirers. On November 8, 1916, Wallis married Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., an American Navy aviator, in Baltimore. Wallis had a phobia for flying after seeing two planes crash within the span of 2 weeks, and she was not fond of her husband's profession. In addition, her husband was also a heavy drinker, which affected his flying and even caused him to crash on one occasion. Spencer's appetite for the bottle, along with the fact that he was often far away for months on duty, meant the couple had an unstable marriage, separating and getting back together several times. While still married to Spencer, Wallis had an affair with Argentine diplomat Felipe de Espio. As a result, the couple divorced on December 10, 1927. In a short period, Wallis became involved with Ernest Aldrich Simpson. They got married on July 21, 1928. The American-born Simpson had become a British citizen during the First World War, and he and Wallis were married in London, where they lived an expensive lifestyle. Wallis's second marriage didn't get on well, and the couple had a difficult start, especially as the stock market crash of 1929 hit them hard. They were then forced to lay off a large portion of their staff, and Wallis's mother died shortly after on November 2, 1929. Prince Edward was a very good-looking man. He had blonde hair and blue eyes and a boyish look on his face that lasted his entire life. Yet, for some reason, he preferred married women. In 1918, Edward met Winifred Freda Dudley Ward. Despite the fact that they were about the same age at 23, Freda had been married for 5 years when they met. For 16 years, she was Edward's mistress. Edward also had a long-term relationship with Viscountess Thelma Furness. On January 10, 1931, Lady Furness hosted a party at her country house, Borough Court, where, in addition to Prince Edward, Wallis and her husband Simpson were invited. It was at this party Wallis and Edward first met. She was 34 while he was 36. Furness was said to be the prince's mistress, but was quickly replaced by Wallis herself when Furness went away to New York in January 1934. Upon Furness's return, she found that she was no longer welcome in Edward's life. Even her phone calls were refused. Wallis's husband trusted her and would retire to bed early while his wife stayed up talking with the prince in the hours of the early morning. He would even allow his wife to dine once a week with the prince alone. The prince, in return, showered Wallis with gifts, from money and jewelry to expensive vacations. Edward was completely smitten with this American woman who did perfectly in keeping the secret love affair from her husband. By the end of 1934, Edward was madly in love with Wallis, attracted by her domineering manner and harsh impertinence toward his position as heir apparent to the throne. In fact, he became slavishly dependent on her that his staff became increasingly alarmed as the affair began to interfere with his official duties. When the prince introduced Wallis to his parents at an evening party in Buckingham Palace, his father, King George V, was outraged, as divorced people were generally excluded from court in 20th century Britain. George's relationship with his eldest son and heir, Edward, deteriorated in the latter years of his reign. The king was disappointed in Edward's failure to settle down in life and disgusted by his many affairs with married women. In contrast, he was fond of his second eldest son, Prince Albert, and doted on his eldest granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth, whom he nicknamed Lilibet. On November 6, 1935, George wrote in his diary of his son Edward, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months. I pray to God my eldest son will never marry and have children, and that nothing will come between Betty and Lilibet and the throne." At 11:55 p.m. on January 20, 1936, King George V died and the former prince became Edward VIII. Edward clearly wanted to marry his longtime mistress Wallis, but their marriage was forbidden by English law. As per the rule of the Church of England, the king was not allowed to marry a woman who had been previously wed if her husband was still alive, and both of Wallis's ex-husbands were still living. Their potential union was seen as morally, socially, and politically inappropriate. Only a few months into his official reign, King Edward proposed to Wallis, thereby creating a constitutional crisis within the United Kingdom. However, on November 16, 1936, the king invited Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin to Buckingham Palace and informed him that he intended to marry Wallis, but the Prime Minister was opposed to the idea and warned that such a marriage would not be acceptable to the people. Wallis, acting on the advice of Edward's staff, left Britain and travelled to France in an attempt to escape heavy press attention. The king, as well as Wallis, was devastated by the separation that, with tears in his eyes, he told her, "I shall never give you up." Interestingly, opposition to the king's love life began to mount. The royal family found Wallis's background and behavior unacceptable for a potential queen. Rumors and innuendo about her circulated in the society that she was perceived to be pursuing the king for his money. Meanwhile, diplomatic relations between the UK and the US strained during the interwar years, and most Britons were reluctant to accept an American as queen consort. Members of the British upper class looked down on Americans with disdain and considered them socially inferior. In contrast, the American press and public were clearly in favor of the marriage. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Lang, held that the king, as the head of the Church of England, could not marry a divorcee, as the church disapproved of divorced people remarrying in church while a former spouse was still alive. This would last until 2002. Lang maintained that if the king married Wallis, a divorcee would soon have two living ex-husbands. It would directly conflict with church teaching and Edward's role as the church's titular head. On the legal angle, Wallis's first divorce in the United States on the grounds of emotional incompatibility was not recognized by the Church of England and, if challenged in the English courts, might not have been recognized under English law. In Edward's time, the Church and English law considered adultery to be the only grounds for divorce. Consequently, under this argument, a second marriage as well as a marriage to Edward would be considered bigamous and invalid. The absence of Wallis made the king's heart grow fonder for her, and he would not budge in his decision. On December 3, 1936, Edward had a tense meeting with Baldwin, who clearly warned that the government would resign en masse if the king went ahead with the marriage, even if it was a morganatic one. At this juncture, King Edward VIII accepted that there was no way forward. Forced to choose between love and the crown, he renounced his throne to be with Wallis. At 10 a.m. on December 10, 1936, in the presence of his three surviving younger brothers, Prince Albert, Prince Henry, and Prince George, King Edward VIII signed the 6 copies of the Instruments of Abdication. The next day, December 11, 1936, Edward, who was now a prince, made a BBC audio broadcast at Windsor Castle. With his abdication, Edward became the first and so far the only British monarch to abdicate the throne voluntarily and the first to abdicate the throne for any reason since 1688, when King James II was deposed in the Glorious Revolution. As Edward VIII had not been crowned, his planned coronation date, May 12, 1937, became that of King George VI instead. Just as his father predicted, Edward's reign had lasted just 325 days, the third shortest in history and the shortest of any British monarch since the disputed reign of Lady Jane Grey in 1553. The day following the broadcast, he left Britain for Austria. On December 12, 1936, the stammering King George VI bestowed upon Edward the family name of Windsor. Thus, Edward became the Duke of Windsor, and when he married Wallis, she became the Duchess of Windsor. In 1936, Time magazine dubbed Wallis its Woman of the Year. It was the first time a female had received such an acknowledgement. For the previous 9 years, the award had been known as Man of the Year, recognizing only men. According to the magazine, Wallis was the most talked about, written about, headlined, and interest-compelling person in the world. Time also noted that Wallis was part of a tide of people and events that was shaking up the calmer United Kingdom and introducing it to a more or less hectic and American future. Wallis's divorce from Simpson was finalized in May 1937, and she and Edward were married on June 3, 1937. No member of the royal family was around for the wedding, and they ultimately shunned the couple. The Duke and Duchess lived out most of their lives in France, with the exception of a short term in the Bahamas as governor. Edward died on May 28, 1972, a month shy of his 70th birthday. His body was flown back to London and was buried without any pageantry. It was a simple ceremony and there was no crown, but a wreath on his coffin. Wallis returned to France and lived for 14 more years, many of which were spent in bed where she suffered from dementia, secluded from the world. She passed away on Thursday, April 24, 1986, 2 months shy of 90, and was buried next to her husband in the royal burial ground near Windsor Castle. And so, the love drama which rocked Britain to its core ended 50 years after it started. Wallis and Edward's love story still ranks as the greatest romance of the 20th century. Even though Wallis never truly loved the king, she stayed on mainly for the perks of royalty. In fact, she seduced the man she truly loved 2 days before her wedding to Edward, imploring him to have sex with her, that any love child she certainly carried would be the former king's. Well, it's been 85 years after his abdication, and most historians do not know what Edward really wanted. But one thing is clear: Edward really was the king who gave up his throne for the woman he loved until death separated them.
Without you, I can't seem to see life's miracles. Without you, oh, without you, without you, I saw your note hanging on the door. Oh no, without you. Without you.